All right, guys, let's welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are our 2025 preview and prediction for the Georgia Bulldogs. Looking at the coaching staff, Kirby Smart has a 105-19 record since taking over his lead man in 2016. Third year for offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, and then offensive coordinator spots will be anchored by Glenn Schumann and Travaris Robinson. Great offseason in terms of recruiting, second highest class in this year's cycle. 2024, they went 11-3. They did win the SEC, but they lost in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. Certainly underwhelming compared to Bulldog standards. Just getting things started with this offense. A big reason why they struggled to 3 losses, Nick, is because this offense was just not that great. They had Carson Beck, who was at the time projected to be a Heisman favorite, number 1 overall pick potential. And now he's at the University of Miami because that's how sour the season went for him. He ended up getting injured in that game against Texas. Ends up being out the rest of the season. Gunnar Stockton ended up getting the keys to the offense for the rest of that game in Atlanta and for the playoff game. And I thought he played quite well, but we still don't have enough on him to really gauge how impressive he will be overall. It's a guy with a good arm. He can make throws with touch, can make plays on the move. Showed good ball placement versus man coverage. Struggled with an eternal clock, though. Had some bad plays due to holding on the ball too long. He will certainly improve with that with experience, though. And again, he was really forced into a tough spot in Atlanta in the CFP game. Could certainly sense some jitters. Should turn into a good distributor of the football. This is a guy that we've talked about the past couple years, Nick, being in this quarterback room. Well, the offense is going to be fully his now. What do you make of what this guy was able to accomplish in his brief appearances last year, and what's the future look like?
Dare I say that Georgia's offense gets much better without Carson Beck. The jury is certainly out on what Carson Beck could do. Obviously, last year was disappointing for him with 12 interceptions, and a lot of those were really bad interceptions where he threw into quadruple, quintuple coverage, throwing it to multiple different guys from I think 2 interceptions in particular that stand out. One against Alabama, one against Florida, where he threw into multi coverage from the opposing teams. But Beck's gone, and now it's the Stockton show. Gunnar Stockton plugs in, similar to Alabama, where they plug in a guy that's been around the program for a couple of years that can really take that next step forward. I was impressed with what I saw in Stockton. Of course, very limited sample size, but I thought the sample size was solid enough. Yes, he made a couple mistakes here and there, but he was thrown in tough positions, so I'm not going to say that they were totally his fault. I can give him a mulligan here. I think he'll have a really good offensive line protecting him. This offense, had some bright spots, right? They were really, solid through the air, 280 yards per game, about 12th in the nation there. They had about 31.5 points per game, which is, not a bad number at all. Certainly would want to see potentially get that a little bit higher here. They didn't run the ball very successfully last year, and I think running back depth could be an issue this year. So it's going to rely on Gunnar Stockton a lot. He's going to have to be really strong and solid, but all the time in the system, a full season of practice in the offseason. I think Gunnar Stockton will be just fine when they plug him into this offense once week 1 kicks off. I'm not super worried about that. I think he has a really high ceiling, and as a quarterback, I think can certainly develop and turn into a really good, serviceable player for the Bulldogs here.
Now you look at the run game. This was a significant concern last year for the Bulldogs. The only game they had of over 170 yards was against UMass. In conference play, they didn't do a whole lot. And going into the game against Notre Dame even, 114.3 yards per game, matter of fact, running in the SEC. A lot of people, Nick, were picking Notre Dame to lose that game because they thought Georgia would overwhelm them with physicality, thought Notre Dame was undersized. And I was like, hold on here. That's not going to happen, and it didn't happen. Nick, 62 rushing yards on 29 attempts. The run game in the first quarter, I think, was kind of solid. The rest of the game, it was not good at all. And it's going to start with these running backs, and of course, we'll talk about the offensive line as well. Nate Frazier, though, has some nice suddenness to him. Loves planting hard versus that first defender. Skinny back with power allows him to really thrive between the tackles. Shows good burst when he gets to the second level. Effective in the red zone as well. They got Roderick Robinson, a third-year player out of San Diego, who's barely seen the field. He's 6'1", 235. Should bring some power to the lineup. Cash Jones is a good route runner. Nice receiving back. Chauncey Bowens was a lower-level 3-star who didn't do much in his 4 games last year. Below average room for the Dogs, Nick. They pick up Josh McCray, a nice physical back who impressed at Illinois at times. The running back room is still just not that good. It's not the unit we're accustomed to seeing for Georgia, where they can split touches right down the middle and everyone still be good. And last year the numbers were solid on Frazier and ETN. But Trevor certainly underperformed compared to what we thought he would do. I thought this is a guy that could have had 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. The run game was just incredibly disappointing, and I think it's going to be much of the same with this running back group. I think you know what you're going to expect from these guys, and it'll ultimately come down to the big bodies up front. What do you make of this room top to bottom, though?
Similar to Beck's performance last year, the running back room did not play up to expectations down in Athens. This is a unit that did not play the level that you would hope for out of a Georgia running back room, even if it is a by-committee approach. 124.2 rush yards per game, 102nd in the nation, just not good enough. I think Kirby Smart knows that. I think Mike Bobo knows that. This is a unit that has to be better this year, so they went out and made some adds, but I think it was a big thing adding Josh McCray from Illinois, who's a really solid back that you can plug in and get success out of him early on, was something that was a good move there. McCray had 600 yards on the ground last year and 10 scores, a solid player from the state of Alabama who went to Illinois before coming back, now playing for Georgia. Nate Frazier, had some good touches as well, 670 yards rushing, 8 scores for him. He's a really solid back. Cash Jones, a phenomenal receiving back. He had 275 yards receiving and 4 scores, also had a singular rushing touchdown. Some further depth there, and Roderick Robinson is not a bad player, and Chauncey Bowens, maybe he can get involved in a couple touches on third down. This unit's got to be better this year, right? They have to step up and find a way to be productive here if this team has any success and hope of winning a national championship. They got to run the ball. They got to get more than 100 yards in a couple of games this year, not just against UMass at home in a blowout. They got to find a way to be successful on the ground this year if this team wants to win a national championship.
Now look at the wide receiver group. It wasn't all Beck. When he was actually on point, his receivers weren't. This is a team that had a significant drop issue. 31 of them, matter of fact, and the top 3 droppers were the top 3 starting receivers. So it was a big, roundabout about everyone just not being great for this offense. They did add some good players in the portal, though. Noah Thomas, great addition from Texas A&M. A physical specimen, a 6'6", 200, nice red zone threat. I like his body control. Has a large catch radius, some solid yak as well. 21 of those drops had come against those top 3 wide receivers. And the lone returnee is a Swiss Army knife and Dylan Bell, 6'1", 210. Should remain an outside wide receiver. The big name value addition here is Zachariah Branch from USC, a guy who possesses elite speed, big-time playmaker on special teams. Never made much of an impact at wide receiver, Nick, for them outside of screens. He's a poor route runner, didn't evolve into a slot player that could really stretch the field for USC. Colby Young is expected to be back after suspension last fall. He's explosive. He's effective on curl routes. London Humphreys didn't really do much last year, but he's a deep threat with his speed. After that, you have a bunch of young players fighting for time. The room really isn't all that bright, I don't think, at the moment, Nick. Zachariah Branch is a USC fan. I'm not being biased at all. I just quite frankly don't think he performed that well at wide receiver. And you see that a lot across football where you have undersized guys who possess great speed, but they don't really seem to do anything else very well. You've kind of seen that in the NFL over the last couple of seasons as well. I think Noah Thomas is a phenomenal addition, though. Dylan Bell, I really like what he can bring to the table. But if this coaching staff can nail it with Branch, this will be a phenomenal trio.
Yeah, if they can certainly find a way to get the most out of Branch, this will be a really good wide receiving room. I know you don't love him coming over from USC. You were disappointed. He was really good on screens, but that seems to be a one-trick pony there. Previously was a high school player for Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, obviously a very high-end high school there. Just didn't work out for him. A very speedy player, undersized certainly, but a guy that you can still potentially get something out of. 500 yards receiving last year and a touchdown. They're hoping for a lot more out of him. He's going to be good on screens. They do run a couple of screens in this offensive style of play, so I think that could certainly be good for them. They bring in Noah Thomas as well from A&M. I think it's a solid add from within the conference. 8 touchdowns, 574 yards receiving for him, about 15 yards per grab. Good numbers there. A guy that's a solid, experienced player in the conference. I think you can't go wrong with an ad like that. Dylan Bell, like you said, a Swiss Army knife, a guy they can get a lot out of. He had, a 460 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, also had 100 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground. So a lot of versatility with him. I think he's a really solid asset that comes back. Landon Humphreys, Colby Young, they're expecting better seasons. Each of them had 2 receiving touchdowns, 150 for Young and 250 for Humphreys in terms of receiving yards. They bring back Oscar Delp at tight end, who had 250 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns as their traditional blocking tight end. That was really solid and physical for them. He's expecting a nice step-up role this year. This is a wide receiver that has some talent. It's certainly one of the better ones in the SEC, but it doesn't really scream off the page at you here with an inexperienced young quarterback that's not played in a lot of tough road environments. Maybe that will be a problem as the season goes on. The drops are an issue last year. If they can cut that up, clean up the play, and Mike Bobo calls some solid offensive plays and schemes up something that's a little bit more comfortable for this offense, they could have some success throwing the ball, certainly.
The aforementioned Oscar Delp headlines, probably the best tight end duo in the country of Lawson Lucky. Both 240 pounds. Both had similar production. Lucky's a really good player down the seam. So some nice pass catching group here in terms of upside. I know it's critical of the wide receiver room, but again, there is a lot of momentum. I think they could certainly play into their favor. Look at the offensive line. This is a group that's going to be a lot of headlines because this is all particularly no former 4- and 5-star players, I'd say they underperformed for the most part last year. But when they're on point, they can play very good. You remember against Tennessee, they held that elite D-line absolutely in check. And without the offense, they have one of their better performances of the year. Monroe Freeling, he's going to be the left tackle, showcases good pop in the run game. Pass pro, he struggled against inside speed, has heavy hands and good balance, though. As expected, the offensive tackle was an area of weakness. I thought that that was going to be a problem for Georgia, and it ended up being one. It's a good player, though, in Freeling in terms of his upside. Micah Morris, 6'4", 330, takes over as a full-time left guard. He's been elite in pass blocking, 0 sacks allowed in his near 500 snaps across his career. Drew Bobo, 6'5", 305, will take over as the starting center. Played a little over 200 snaps last year. Center's not been a position for Georgia, I don't think, ever under Smart, it seems, Nick, especially over the last couple of years. Right guard, more of a wide-open, unknown battle. But I think Daniel Calhoun here is going to be a phenomenal addition for this offensive line. He was a high-ranked 4-star, 6'6", 325. With some development, I think can be a high-end player. Has already got strong rip, massive frame, very athletic puller with some great length. And then Ernest Green, he really struggled at left tackle. Appears he'll be moving to right tackle full-time. He's been impressive at times in pass pro, but doesn't establish much force in the run game, despite being 6'4", 320. A ton of 4-star recruits occupy backup spots, and you have an incoming freshman in 5-star Juan Gaston. The offensive line just hasn't shown the same dominance, and they now replace 4 starters. Should have some growing pains, but I think overall they're going to be fine. They'll be a lot better than they were last year, Nick. Really highlighting these guard positions. I think they have some very special talents at those spots. It's really going to come down to what these tackles can do, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I think this is certainly an offensive line that's going to show me a whole lot. Lawson Lucky slipped my mind, a very good tight end, 350 yards and 3 scores for him last year. I think he'll be really solid for this offense, a good player that they return. This offensive line, right, it's really about the tackles. Can Ernest Green have a good season? He had a messy year at times last year. Certainly, the jury has been a little bit out on him. He's got to step up and be solid for this team. He's going to have to be a key asset early on. If he can play good football, that will be solid. And then the same thing for Monroe Freeling. He's got to be good for this team as well. These are 2 guys that have not had a lot of success at times. They need to step up and be really strong. Drew Bobo, I think, could be really solid at center. Like you said, center's not really an issue or a spot you think about with this Georgia offense. In the previous years, they just seem to always have centers that are reliable and sturdy. I think Bobo can be solid for them. He's got some good reps. Micah Morris and Daniel Calhoun are 2 really solid guards. I have no issues with them. I think the interior will be just fine. I am worried about the tackles, right? I think I'm certainly concerned about Green. He's a guy I want to keep an eye on for sure. Freeling has some issues as well. Some of the depth chart there, you wonder if they could potentially plug somebody in if it does not go well. These 2 tackles, they got to be strong here. They have to play good football. If these guys have a bad season, it could certainly be a problem for Georgia, which saw some weaknesses at times on the offensive line. It certainly impacted the running game for this offense. The O-line's got to be on point so this running game can fly and then get back to playing the same type of football they used to play.
Looking at the offensive verdict, the Bulldog offense was sporadic last season, and they had a QB lower his stock with poor play. A wide receiver group that did him no favors in a run game that could, again, only top 200 versus UMass. A ton of those liabilities are gone. It's a fresh start for this unit. Should see an improvement, but I'm not certain you will. But on the road and early in the year, could see plenty of challenges. Not having Todd Monken as OC, Nick, might really start to show up here. B+ for me. Obviously, they can get up to an A+, and under Monken with Stetson Bennett, they were an A+. They were great with balance. They put up a lot of points. They were fun to watch. But again, I think Monken not being here is probably going to rub off really significant this year potentially.
I think Bobo's not been a phenomenal OC since he took over from Monken. I think the loss of Monken still burns hard for this program. He really just seemed to scheme up the right things here. Beck was disappointing last year. The offense as a whole was disappointing last year. They're replacing Jared Wilson and Tate Ratledge, who were 2 guards that got, or 2 offensive line pieces, a center and a guard that got drafted, 2 really talented pieces. I worry about the tackles. The wide receiving room has some interesting names, but you worry about some of the production there as well. This offense is a wait-and-see approach for me. I think a B+ is a fair grade for them right now, but this running game has to step up. This passing attack has to step up, and Stockton has to play really good football if this team has dreams of competing for a national title.
Looking at the Bulldogs defense now. This is a team that only returns 3 starters. They lost 5 of the top 10 tacklers, so they get a good amount of production back at the same time. This is a defense that I'd say underperformed last year compared to what you typically used to seeing. They just weren't as forceful in the trenches. Gave up almost 21 points per game. Starts with the defensive line. Christian Miller, 6'4", 305, is really expected to be the next alpha up front. He was a great run defender last season. Xavier McLeod, the South Carolina transfer, was solid in his brief reps. Brings a larger frame of 6'4", 315. Athletic player with strength who can stack and shed. Jordan Hall has struggled to get on field as a next 5-star recruit. He was banged up most of last year, though, and they're hopeful he can have a breakout season in 2025. Nnamdi Okboko barely saw the field last season, but he's 340 pounds. He can likely be a gap clogger for them. Nazir Johnson's 340 pounds, along with being 6'6". Great athletic ability and length. They also have an incoming 5-star in Elijah Griffin in the fold. Defensive end depth isn't as pronounced, though. Joseph Jonah Ajani, he was a top 60 recruit in last year's class, has functional athleticism, great closing burst and motor. He's in a battle with a fellow 4-star in Justin Green, and the top-rated edge in this incoming class, Isaiah Gibson. Gabe Harris, though, he's expected to fill the shoes of Micah Williams, possesses a quick first step, should be lethal with added strength on top of his finesse game. Elite group here, one of the best country based on pure size alone. Biggest problem with Georgia, Nick, is they just have not been as dominant in the trenches as they were during their national title run. That doesn't mean they haven't been great, right? But again, they've not been as dominant. You've seen that show up in numerous games. Georgia Tech absolutely demolished them on the ground. Notre Dame, they were able to stay ahead of the sticks for a good portion of that game. They couldn't slow down the QB run against Bama until the second half. And then Kentucky, they grinded it down, running straight at them between the tackles. That was a pure weakness for them. But against Texas, they were elite. Allowed 29 and 31 yards in those respective contests. They should be doing that on a more consistent basis, Nick, and I think you'll start to see them get back to that in 25.
They've not been as dominant. They've not been up to the high standard, the high bar that Kirby Smart set with his defenses. Giving up 130 yards per game on the ground, 36 in the nation, is not a typical number for a Georgia Bulldogs defense. They got beaten some of those games on the ground, and it certainly was a problem for them. They got to be strong, and it starts with this, front part of this defense here. I think Miller's a good player you return. 27 total tackles for him, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and a pass breakup. Good numbers there. Xavier McLeod, they're hoping he will step up as a transfer for them. Previous transfer, that is, 13 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 pass breakups. He's a really talented player. Gabe Harris, what is he going to look like? Is he going to step up? Is Jonah Ajayi going to step up and be solid? Nazir Johnson, can he find a way in? Elijah Griffin, as a true freshman, is he going to be able to jump on the field and get some things done early on? This is a unit that's got some good pieces. I certainly like what they have here, but they got to find a way to put these pieces together. The D-line size, I'm a little bit questionable. They just have not been as strong in the trenches the last couple of years, and it has been the problem why they've missed out on a national title these past 2 years. They're not the dominant force they used to be. They're still phenomenal, but they got to find a way to step up a little bit here. Some of these offensive lines are getting better in the SEC. I think they're falling just a little bit behind the power curve.
And it's really hard to point to one guy that's going to be a bona fide stud. I think Miller's the guy you look to, but losing 2 vets in Warren Brinson and Nazir Sackhouse could certainly be an issue for them. But I have faith in Kirby Smart and the staff to get these guys going. Too much talent, too much skill and size to be lacking in that department. Looking in the middle of this defense, the linebackers are great. C.J. Allen's the leader in the room, has emerged as an elite run defender. He was a liability in coverage, though. Raylan Wilson, on the other hand, was an efficient tackler, played very well while Smail Munden was out. You have 2 second-year 5-stars behind them in Justin Williams and Chris Cole. Williams, great speed and nice downhill pop, will most certainly be used, I think, in blitz packages this fall. Cole also possesses great speed along with length. It'll be interesting to see how they utilize these two, especially with trying to find a Jalen Walker replacement. Obviously, that guy was tremendous coming off the edge. They could use him as a QB spy or just leave him in the middle of the defense. Elite linebacking group, Nick. Ridiculous amounts of talent. They also picked up Elo Modazi from Army. This is a guy who was a phenomenal pass rusher for them. He had 7 stacks for what was a really good football squad last fall. What do you think of this linebacking group, Nick? Because I gave it a lot of praise, and I assume you will as well.
Yeah, it's a great linebacking group. I think this is a unit that I'm super high on, and for obvious reasons. This is a very talented unit, probably the best unit on the team overall. C.J. Allen's a great returning asset for them. 76 total tackles, the top returning tackler, the second top tackler on this team last year. 3 tackles for loss, a pick, and 4 pass breakups for him. He's a really solid asset. Raylan Wilson's been good for this team. 47 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and a pass breakup for him. He's a really solid guy that's versatile. He can move him around. Chris Cole, speaking of versatility, he's got a lot of that. 16 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a pass breakup for him. I think Justin Williams can be involved in this defensive unit as well at linebacker. He's a really solid player. And then when you talk about Mendoza, who they add from Army, kind of funny that you pick up a player from Army only in the NIL transfer portal era. Are you going to add transfer prospects from a service academy in Army? But he stood out on that defense last year. 34 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, plus 7 QB hurries, which I think is a key stat. Had some good games in the latter half of the season. Had 4 total tackles against Louisiana Tech in late December last year. Also had 3 tackles against Tulane in the conference championship game. So he put some solid numbers up there. Great linebacking unit, a phenomenal unit. Kirby's going to coach these guys up. This is going to be a very vaunted and tough unit to play against this year.
When I look at the Georgia secondary, if you're looking for one weakness, I'd say it's this cornerback group. Returning both starters at corner, Daniel Harris really struggled in coverage at the end of the year. He was picked on following the late loss of Julian Humphrey. He ended up transferring before the SEC title game because that's what you do when you play for a winning football team. Dalen Everett, he really impressed at times, though, showcasing his aggression and high-end football IQ. Did allow 500-plus yards in coverage and struggled to limit Yak due to his poor tackling. Ellis Robinson, though, he was the top-ranked corner in last year's class. He figures to make a strong push for more snaps and probably even a starting role at some point this year. Andre Evans could see more time as well as he improved his physicality to play press. DeMilo Jones was an even higher-ranked 4-star than Evans was in last year's class. So plenty of competition to be had here. Jonel Aguero should take over the full-time slot role as Malachi Starks is gone. He was solid in his reps last fall, showed the ability to come downhill and set the edge versus the run. This cornerback group, Nick, it has talent, but the two starters do concern me a little bit. I think Everett as a senior should really rise up and play better. And Harris, I know he was forced into a tough situation at the end of the year, but you're playing at Georgia. These corners have got to be stout. And if one of them aren't, Robinson's likely going to take over that role, and it might benefit this defense.
I think it certainly could potentially benefit this defense. I think Harris had some questionable moments. Certainly a guy that you could look to as potentially a player that's vulnerable in his spot right now. 22 total tackles for him. 1 tackle for loss, 3 pass breakups last year. Certainly got picked on. I think Everett's a more reliable asset in your secondary there. A player that I could certainly rely on a bit more. 58 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, 3 picks, 3 pass breakups. Good numbers there. Also had 2 forced fumbles. I think Aguero is a player that I really like watching. 26 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss. A guy that's continued to develop and turn into a star in the secondary here. I got to be careful with Harris here. You got to make sure that he's going to be playing solid football. Maybe Elias Robinson could catch up to him and potentially take that spot there. That's one you want to keep an eye on, certainly, because that's a position that could be really dangerous. Teams might attack that left cornerback position a lot early on, and that may be because Harris is just a little bit weaker here.
You look at the safety group. KJ Bolden, he's next up. He's going to be elite. He played a lot last year and showcased very impressive range and instincts. He's good in coverage. He can be a single high safety. Showcased great pop when coming downhill. Pretty much a clone of Malachi Starks, it seemed like, Nick. And as he departs, he comes in. Jaden Harris comes over from Miami. He's been below average player so far in his career. Adrian Maddox was great in the slot for UAB last fall. 2 transfers they picked up in this group. Didn't play very much. Pure safety, though, that being Maddox. They also picked up Zion Branch. He follows his brother over from USC, who he didn't play a lot there. He was a good tackler in his time for the Trojans. And you also have Ja'Cory Thomas, kind of a lesser-named senior there. Dan Jackson was actually pretty impressive, Nick. He actually rose up and ended up being the 3rd best tackler last year, so it's a bit of a more monumental loss than I would have initially assumed. What do you think of the safety group? Because it's certainly a little iffy because they do have, about 3 transfers here for the safety group. It's pretty odd to see Georgia attack one positional group that much. We also have KJ Bolden, who's going to be an All-American, so does it really matter that much?
I guess KJ Bolden balances out the concerns they added from the portal. Bolden looked really good as a true freshman last year. 59 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 1 pick, 1 pass breakup. Do it all kind of player, really solid in the secondary there. A great guy. Ja'Cory Thomas, I'm a little concerned on him. He's a veteran, though, so he's been around the system for a while. Adrian Maddox could certainly step up from UAB. He's a guy you want to keep an eye on. Zion Branch had some good moments at USC, but nothing special here. It's the KJ Bolden show for the safeties here. This is just a phenomenal player who really played good football last year. The 5th highest tackler on this team. Really good against the run, really good in coverage as well. Excited to see how he continues to develop in the system.
Defensive verdict, I think we see Georgia get back to utter dominance in the front 7 as they have too much size and talent to struggle versus the run. The secondary will see competitiveness from the cornerback position, which in turn will produce better results, while, again, the aforementioned Bolden will emerge into a playmaking star. Should see improvements across the board. A+ from me, Nick. Try to talk me out of it.
This is a phenomenal unit here. This is a really good defense that I think can do a whole lot. I think A+ makes sense here, right? I'm a little concerned about the D-line. I think that's the weakest part of this team. I think certainly Harris at left cornerback you want to keep an eye on, but I think A+ is fair for this. This is a very good Georgia defense. They really weren't at the same level as they expect out of them last year, but it's still a phenomenal unit. It's still got a lot of 5-stars, a lot of high-end talent. The linebacking core is just vaunted. You do not want to face any of those guys. They'll be great in coverage and great against the run. This is just a phenomenal defense and earned A+ for me as well.
Looking at the final prediction and the schedule for the Georgia Bulldogs, it's hard to be consistently dominant in the trenches, and I think you're seeing Georgia fall victim to that as elite talents have departed. But this fall, you're going to see them get back to overwhelming opponents. With that said, I think you'll see some growing pains on offense throughout the year, as I don't think you'll get the playmaking you would hope for from the supporting cast, and the pass defense might show some vulnerabilities. And, that stuff I say about the offense, Nick, could be a problem because you play Tennessee on the road very early. and I don't expect Tennessee to be the greatest opponent this year, but playing them that early with some of the weaknesses that I'm concerned about on offense, that could plague you right into an early loss. And then you have Alabama after a bye week after that. It would be hard to assume that Georgia, goes even 0-2 in those games or even loses one of those games, but I think it's certainly possible if the offense doesn't show some emphatic improvements early on. I think overall this is a difficult schedule. It's one that's manageable. You play at Auburn, that's going to be hard. Hosting Texas after beating them twice last year, I think you're confident in that game. And I think you're also confident you get revenge on Ole Miss. I have them losing to Florida, though, in Jacksonville, Nick, at the cocktail party. Only blemish here. I think this team gets back to being dominant. But I definitely am curious to see how they play in September.
I equally think this team gets back to being dominant. Don't really play a tough non-conference. They play Marshall and Austin Peay at a conference, as well as Georgia Tech in their rivalry game. Georgia Tech almost beat them last year in a couple overtimes. The Tech team is a team I'm very high on. Maybe keep an eye on that one November 28th. Really want to watch how that kind of develops at a neutral site technically there, but still there'll be a lot of good strong fan presence from both teams. Speaking of another neutral site game, I'm saying in quotations, you look at the greatest cocktail party down in Jacksonville, great spot for it, really always a fun game. Florida could certainly win that game. I'm not going to pull the trigger on that. I think they're going to end up losing to probably Alabama or Texas. I'm leaning closer to Texas right now. You could talk me into Alabama as well. I think the Florida game will be ultra competitive though. Don't sleep on the game at Auburn. Jordan-Hare is a tough place to play. We saw them give Georgia a run for their money 2 years ago when they traveled down to the Plains. They got bailed out by their generational talent, Brock Bowers, who won them that game. Also, I think you made a great point about that Tennessee trip, right? That's a very early trip deep into one of the toughest environments in the conference, if not the nation, in Knoxville there for a young quarterback who's going to only have played some weaker teams in Marshall and Austin Peay before that. You're going to throw him into a tough environment at Rocky Top. It's going to be absolutely rocking. That stadium's going to be shaking on the Riverside. So certainly a tough spot to kind of earn your stripes. If they can get out of that with a convincing win, they'll probably feel pretty good hosting Alabama. They have a really long win streak right now. I think it's like 31 games in the nation, or 31 games and in a row at home. By the time Alabama comes to town, it's probably going to be 33 games in a row. Can the Tide snap that win streak? Maybe it'll be Texas that does it later down the line. I think that 30-plus game win streak is certainly in danger this year more than it is most seasons. This is a big opportunity for that streak to be snapped. But I do think the Bulldogs find a way to get to the SC title game. They'll probably go 11-1. This is a very strong team with phenomenal coaching, even if I'm still thinking the offensive side of the ball might be a little bit questionable. The defense will bail them out of a lot of tough situations. Very high on this Georgia Bulldogs team that's in a really good position right now.